It's bloody hot, so I'll probably keep this review a little bit short, considering my computer has been heating a little and I wanted to try and keep off as much as possible. So here is a not as long review of the new album by As Everything Unfolds, titled Ultraviolet. This album was promoted mainly through the Enshikari support, as they were support act for the round 2 for their Kiss for the Whole World tour in March, which I went to see, and I was actually impressed by the band, to be honest. I thought they had a really good, strong performance. I think everyone was just absolutely into their role, and I think they sold it as a really good overall, pretty good band, if anything. I was quite happy to have a great support act like this. Not that Cody Frost wasn't anything good, but I think As Everything Unfolds was definitely, in my opinion, the stronger of the two. But anyway, this album is pretty good. I think compared to the last album, I kind of think this one's a little bit more memorable. I don't know if it's just because the songs, I think, are a little bit more accessible for fans. I'm not always one to kind of pick up like more unique, more interesting details necessarily straight away. So I personally feel like a lot of this album jumped out at me easily compared to the first one. The first one still had some great songs, but it had a lot of different ideas scattered throughout each track, and I feel this one does the same thing on this album, but it kind of feels a little bit, I guess, confined to more of a similar sound than the first album. Not too much, though. I still think it's got enough freedom to make the songs breathe and feel unique to each other. You've had some pretty strong singles. Ultraviolet was generally just a great one. This one always stood out to me, and it definitely makes sense why this one is the album self-titled track, so that's pretty nice of that. It's definitely one of the stronger ones. I think it's got a catchy refrain. I think just the screamers as well in this one are great. There's also some softer ones as well, kind of incorporated in this, which I quite like. Well, not soft, but if anything, the less unclean, so they got a bit of a balance there. You can go on to songs like Slow Down or Flip Side if you want something a little bit more aggressive, if you want something a little bit more heavier, but then you could also go into something like Felt Like Home, just for a little bit of a kind of calmer direction. Even Rose Bouquets, which is definitely one of the softer tracks. There's some brilliant stuff as well. I think a lot of the songs have some really catchy refrains. Some of my best examples both end with the word light. This is Twilight and Daylight, which to me are definitely two of the stronger non-singles. Daylight's got the most catchy refrain out of the non-single stuff, whereas Twilight, I think, has definitely got one of the most consistent performances, just in terms of how I love the overall ambience on this one. I think the heaviness balanced with the kind of softer vocal tone for the verses is great. Twilight's definitely just a fantastic track, and Daylight is absolutely probably one of the more underrated ones. But yeah, I do really enjoy the first half. I think when it gets to Infrared, which definitely I'd say is my least favorite, because it's kind of like a little more or less a short interlude. It's less of a song, and it kind of, that's my kind of bummer with this album, is you have 11 songs that are all equally good on the first album, but on this one you have 10 with more of an interlude being the 11th one. But as a whole, I think it's a nice little separation from the first half to the second half, because, I mean, you're going from Blossom, which is a bit of a change of pace from tracks like Slow Down and Ultraviolet, but I do love this one still, and it holds up nicely. It's sandwiched, Infrared sandwiched with Blossom, and then it's sandwiched with Flip Side on the below it. So you pretty much have this little interlude to kind of connect the two halves, and it works great. Flip Side is absolutely just an amazing performance. I was not expecting this one to be absolutely catchy, and I did not expect this one to be absolutely insane. It is one of my favourite songs from As Everything Unfolds. I can say that with a lot of the tracks, honestly, because I feel like there's a lot more of a step up. I think even lyrically, it's got some of my favourite lyrics in there, especially Slow Down. I just love the little bit where it's like, heavy is the head that wears the crown, that kind of, while also growling is a nice little delivery passage to it. And yeah, honestly, I say this album, I'd probably say the one thing that I also kind of forget a bit is the final track, All I've Ever Known. Normally the final track does absolutely shock me, because there has been some moments where it has, especially Wither. Wither has been one of my favourite songs from the last album, but if anything, I'd say that being one of my favourites, all I've ever known is one of my least favourites. I feel the album doesn't have the strongest ending as it could, even the songs before it being fantastic. I think this one is just one of the more forgettable ones. There is a lot of iconic stuff that just sticks out in my head, but this is the one that kind of doesn't do that. There's not really much I can say with this other than I guess it's kind of a nice change of pace as well, but I mean Daylight and Rose Bouquets definitely just hold up so much nicer, and I feel if they were to kind of change the track listing, that probably would help, because I feel like you can just put one of those two songs at the end and it would work a bit better. But I still like this album. I'm not saying it's the best album of all time, but I was quite personally hooked onto it, and it has been one I think has just grown on me as time's gone on. It's definitely been my favourite album that came out on this day, I'll say at least. And there's been 3 albums. I'm not sure if I'm going to review the other one, which is Red Hook, because Red Hook did their first debut album, Postcard of a Living Hell, I believe is the title. I don't know if I'm going to review that, but the other one was Enshikari, and if anything, I think As Everything Unfolds is just better than that in terms of it just kind of pulls in some of their better ideas. Necessarily the most creative record, especially in discography. It kind of feels like they're taking elements from the previous album but giving it its own little twist and pushing it in a whole new direction. It still feels quite, in some cases, similar in structure, but I think the ideas are good enough to push it into having its own crazy identity that just holds up nicely. And honestly, I will say I just think the vocalist has a great vocal range as well on here. It's definitely a fun album. I'd probably give it a 4 out of 5, which definitely breaks the chain of having loads of songs that were 3.5 in a row, which I had noticed. But if I'm going to be honest, going back through the Enshikari review, the Foo Fighters review, and the Avenged Sevenfold one, I probably might change my opinion on at least 1 or 2 of them. I personally think Foo Fighters could be a bit higher than a 3.5, because it is a great album. And I think the others, 3.5, 3 or 4, I'm not really too bothered. I think kind of 3.5 fits it, but I say this album is a good 4 just because it does push ideas that I wasn't as big on in the first album to greater heights. The first album has some of their more forgettable songs, and I've gone back to that numerous times, but it just doesn't stand out to me as much as this one. I think a lot of people, from what I've seen, did like this album but kind of prefer the first one, but I kind of feel I'm in the boat for the second being the better of the two. But yeah, that is my opinion on As Everything Unfolds. I'm also going to note that I'm going to go on holiday later in June, and there's going to be a few more reviews hopefully coming out, but if there's a little break, that's just because of holiday. So that's going to be my little break there, but I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you for watching, and see you guys in the next review. Bye.